We go first to an old argument that has taken on new life, drug legalization. A growing chorus of prominent and ideologically diverse voices from public life and academic circles are asking for a reconsideration of present drug policy. This weekend, Michigan Democrat George Crockett became the first member of Congress to call publicly for the decriminalization of drugs. Last week, Robert Sweet, a federal district judge in Manhattan, endorsed legalizing all drugs, including marijuana, heroin, and crack. Other like-minded advocates include conservative commentator William F. Buckley and Kurt Schmoke, the Democratic mayor of Baltimore. Also among the ranks of legalization advocates is former Secretary of State George Shultz. Last October at the Stanford Business School, Shultz said, quote, "We're not really going to get anywhere until we can take the criminality out of the drug business," unquote. Earlier, in the Wall Street Journal, economist and Nobel Prize winner Milton Friedman endorsed drug legalization in an open letter to William Bennett, the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. A week ago, Bennett responded to these and other drug legalization supporters in a speech at Harvard University.
Legalization advocates think that the cost of enforcing drug laws is too great. But the real question, the question they never ask, is what does it cost not to enforce those laws? The price that American society would have to pay for legalized drugs, I submit, would be intolerably high. We would have more drug-related accidents at work, on the highways, and in the airways. We would have even bigger losses in worker productivity. What about crime? To listen to some legalization advocates, one might think that street crime would disappear with the repeal of our drug laws. They haven't done their homework, I believe. Our best research indicates, and we could use some more research on this indeed, but our best research, much of it done here, indicates that most drug criminals were into crime well before they got into drugs. Making drugs legal would just be a way of subsidizing their habit. They would continue to rob and steal to pay for food, for clothes, for entertainment.
We join this debate now with four different perspectives. For legalization, we have Ethan Nadelman, a professor of politics and public affairs at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public Policy and International Affairs at Princeton University. And joining us from Hartford, Connecticut is Democratic Mayor Carrie Saxon Perry. She's in the studios of public station WEDH. Against legalization, we have Sterling Johnson, the special narcotics prosecutor for New York City, and Democratic Congressman Charles Rangel from New York, who is chairman of the House Select Committee on Narcotics Abuse and Control. Professor Nadelman, your article in Science magazine, which has stirred up some of the fresh debate on this, including the article that got George Shultz to take the position we quoted him as taking. Very simply, would you state your argument for us? Why legalize? What are the benefits of legalizing, and how would you restrict the use of drugs if you did legalize it?
Robin, it's basically a three-part argument. The first one is that everything we've been doing in the past in terms of criminal justice approaches to the drug problem, everything we're doing now, and everything that people from Charlie Rangel to Bill Bennett are talking about doing in the future is doomed to failure. And it has nothing to do with turf squabbles between law enforcement agencies or corruption in Latin America. It has to do with the nature of the market, the nature of the commodity, and how lucrative the whole thing is. Simply stated, we can't keep drugs out of the country. We can't keep them out of the inner cities. We can't keep them out of the hands of those people who want them. Secondly, and more importantly, it's that drug policies are not only not working very well, they're proving highly costly and counterproductive in much the same way that alcohol prohibition did 60 years ago. Everything from organized crime to rising levels of violence and corruption, overflowing prisons, even tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people dying or being poisoned by bad drugs in the same way that people were poisoned by bad bootleg liquor 60 years ago. All of those things are the results of drug prohibition. Now, legalization is no panacea, it's no surrender, but it is an alternative. The third part of the argument is that we have a lot less to fear from legalization than most people assume. That if you run a policy even halfway intelligently, it'll be far superior to the drug prohibition policy that we've had so far.
How do you prevent, how do you restrict the use of drugs if you legalize it?
60 years ago, when we went to prohibition to restrict the availability of alcohol, the British wanted to restrict alcoholism as well. What they did was not to go to prohibition. What they did was they taxed much higher. They put all sorts of time and place restrictions on use. They limited pub hours. They did all sorts of things like that. The British succeeded in reducing alcoholism and alcoholic-related ills much more successfully than we did in the United States, and without all the costs, without giving billions of dollars to criminals and wasting billions of dollars in taxes. So when I ask, how do we do a legalization plan today, we don't just throw up our hands. What we do is we restrict, we tax, we set up better programs, and we take the resources that we're putting now into more and more prisons and more jail cells and more interdiction. We take those resources and we put them into the types of things that we know work. And what that means is Head Start programs, pre- and postnatal care, better schools. Those are the best drug prevention programs we've ever seen. They're the decent and compassionate thing to do. And dollar for dollar, they're more effective than building more courts and more prisons to throw more people in jail for drug law violations.
Okay, Mayor Perry in Hartford, you're a fairly recent convert to the idea of decriminalization. What is your argument for doing that?
Well, not a recent convert. I did testify Congressman Rangel's committee in '88, and I've always thought about it, but I wasn't in a public position in which people were listening as closely. I am responding to decriminalization because I'm in the eye of the hurricane here in the city of Hartford. And I just heard the comments from Bennett when he said that these are criminals who are mostly involved. In the city of Hartford, he must not have visited. Many of them are very young people. And a great deal of the attraction is the money that's involved in this underground economy. And this is one of the reasons that I think it's important for us as a nation and as policymakers to look at this as a real alternative and to explore it rather than to be smug and ignore it.
Congressman Rangel, are you being smug and ignoring it?
No, it's fortunate that there are not too many people involved in this so-called legalization. I think as it relates to Judge Crockett, coming from the inner city of Detroit, that his constituencies would more than deal with that problem there. It's interesting to note how the professor, and underscore professor, is talking about what is needed in the inner cities, as though we would have to legalize drugs in order to deal with the problems of the poor. It would seem to me that now is the time to talk about better education, better housing, better job skills, better opportunity, especially for our homeless, where we have a large number of addicted people. I think it's mean-spirited to say that the only way to get this money to take care of these serious social problems is to legalize drugs, or to say that the penal system is not working properly. It never has. It certainly isn't working now. And I think this is the time to talk about prison reform. But it's just absolutely dumb to say that in order to take care of the problems of the poor in the inner cities, and in order to reform a non-working, failing prison system, we will have to expose millions of people to a poisonous drug that causes children to be born addicted, physically and mentally impaired, and to become impediments on society for years ahead.
I take it you haven't heard anything from Professor Nadelman to change your mind.
The professor and other professors, I really think, have enough time to go to cocktail parties, to go on the lecture circuit, and to chit-chat about these things. As a matter of fact, the former Secretary of State has never given any formal speeches or written any papers about the serious nature of drug addiction, nor did he indicate any interest in having this as a foreign policy priority during the time he was Secretary of State on this program or any. Interesting, though, that he would find time to focus on this at a cocktail party, and I think that's where the discussion should stay.
Have you heard anything in the new argument to change your mind, Mr. Johnson, about
First of all, I don't think it's new. I've heard nothing that would persuade me. I find nothing that's interesting. I think the proponents of legalization are seeking to solve a complex problem with very, very simple solutions. And when you're trying to impose legalization of drugs on the people on the inner cities, what a horrible subliminal message that this sends to people in the inner cities. You speak to the addicts, you speak to the parents of the addicts, and they will tell you, no, we do not want legal drugs. We want to abstain from drugs altogether. Can you see yourself giving a baby some crack in the pablum? Can you see putting heroin in the milk? I suggest not. And if you're going to have a cutoff at a certain age, you're still going to have a black market, and you're still going to have drug selling and drug using. You're not going to solve the problem.
Professor Nadelman, you have with you two of the staunchest opponents to your ideas, who are each, as responsible officials, carry a great deal of authority in their different spheres. You have an opportunity to persuade them.
Well, the first thing I could probably say to the congressman is that, from what I understand, you have far greater experience with cocktail parties than I have now or ever will have. That's first. Secondly, you talk about the crack babies. Right? And crack babies are a horrible, horrible thing in our society. There's no question about it.
They're not
but let's
things.
remember,
they're human beings.
Exactly.
Okay.
And let's remember that 5 years ago, when Reagan declared this war on drugs, and while that you were head of the Select Committee on Narcotics in Congress, there were no crack babies. Everything that you've been talking about, and the administration, because there's really not that much difference between you and the administration, everything you've been talking about has done nothing for those crack babies.
I agree
and you know
with
why?
You,
because
Professor.
building more prisons, Congressman, building more prisons, we've doubled. We're going to have 1 million people behind bars as of next year. Double what it was 10 years, triple what it was 15 years ago. That doesn't prevent crack babies. If you would stop pulling the wool over the eyes of the people in the inner cities and persuading them that somehow we can keep drugs out of this country if only we wanted to, and persuade them that we need to invest the resources, limited resources, where they make a difference. Put that money, tell Bennett that you don't want money for more cops and more prisons, that you want money for Head Start and pre- and postnatal care. You have a lot of power in Congress. You can do that. But I have not heard you and most other black leaders in the inner cities calling for that. I have a lot of respect for Mayor Schmoke and a lot of respect for Mayor Perry. They're not the professors. They're dealing with the problem even more directly than you are.
Professor,
and I think that they have guts to stand up there as elected officials and say what's
Professor,
right.
I've never seen you so out of control and so emotional. We're only having a discussion, and I thought you just wanted to have a debate. First of all, you don't have to talk about black leaders unless you think that this is a black problem, and I'm prepared to discuss that with you. So I don't know why you think, if we're talking about social reform, that this is a matter just for leaders who happen to be black. Second, you coupled me with Ronald Reagan, and this was a man that has slashed the budget some $200 billion in social and economic domestic programs, and I would like to be included in that number that have fought against this. I don't think anyone's been more outspoken. Why in God's name would you take such a stupid argument of legalization to push me and others to do the right moral thing, and that is to try to eliminate poverty, to call for more and decent houses? I don't know what you do at Princeton, but I don't run away from my record and what I have advocated and what I've done to improve the quality of life.
Why
would you have to have legalization to do these things?
Because
that is
you know
absolutely
why?
dumb.
Because Congressman, prohibition is making things worse. You got a situation now in the inner cities where kids,
liquor with prohibition?
Let him finish his point.
Where kids are growing up and their role models are not you, but the drug dealers. You're creating a situation under prohibition where there are tremendous economic incentives for the best and the brightest of the kids in the inner cities to drop out of school and to go and be a drug dealer. You're creating a situation where the drugs on the streets are far more dangerous because they're adulterated in the same way that bootleg liquor was.
You still have bootlegging as far as relates to liquor. And why you keep talking about liquor when it's far easier to walk away from a cocktail.
Well, just this last point.
It's far easier to walk away from a cocktail than it is from a crack vial. I mean, why do you keep talking about this like prohibition was something that was so terrible, and they legalized liquor, and so they should legalize crack? To follow your argument, it would be like giving another drink to an alcoholic and making it legal.
Not at all, Congressman.
Well, don't you believe?
Not at all.
Why do you believe that we cannot have better schools, better housing, better job opportunities? Why do you have to hitch these moral issues to this dumb program of legalization. Why can't you say that our prison system is not working? We put in dumb people, we discharge dumb people, they don't have any skills, they can't assimilate in society. Can't you get on something that deals with prison reform, that improves education, without saying that in the inner cities, that we should take care of these problems by dispensing drugs? Because what you're saying, if that's what they want, give it to them.
Congressman, open your eyes, because when you see what's happening, we've had drug prohibition and drug wars in the inner cities for 20 years, and things have just gotten worse
now,
and
how would
worse
somebody
and
from
worse.
Princeton
And
know
that's the
this?
result.
How would you know this
well,
from Princeton?
Let's go to somebody who administers an inner city, city with a big inner city, Mayor Perry.
That's right. I wanted to ask, what have been the benefits of prohibition? Things have gotten much worse. Probably I would be a little bit more confident if Congressman Rangel was the drug czar. But I'm not very confident with Bennett being the drug czar that we are going to have some change. We're talking about what's going to happen. In 20 years, we won't have any young people or babies to talk about if this continues to escalate. 80% of the crimes committed in the city of Hartford are drug-related. And many people are victims who are not drug users. So you have an epidemic where you have the victim and the victimizers both suffering equally. So somewhere along the line, we have to interrupt this epidemic. We must listen to this plague and say, what are some of the alternatives? We cannot dismiss looking at all the choices that are threatening. It's worse than the oil spill in Alaska. We're 2% of the population in the world and 60% of the consumers. Why is there such a great demand for drugs within our community? And in our inner city, one of the driving engines is the money. And there is the outstanding collusion among everyone within the neighborhoods because of the amount of money involved. There are moral people who would otherwise turn their backs on this kind of unacceptable social behavior. But because of a Reagan administration, which caused so many people to be homeless, because we have so many unemployed, they respond to this kind of economy. And I'm saying to all of you in this wonderful debate that there's serious things that are happening, and our cities are dying, the prison sucks, and you talk about reform, you're talking about turning things around, we're talking about a number of years, and I'm saying let's be serious and look at it and debate it seriously.
Mayor Perry, let me interrupt you for a moment. Let me ask you, Mr. Johnson, are you prepared to consider that there's an alternative, a real alternative to the present policy?
We need more treatment, prevention, education. You need law enforcement, but you can't have one of these.
But those are all the present policy.
No, it's not. We're getting them now, and you must have all of these things going at one time. You can't have law enforcement at the expense of education, or education at the expense of prevention. You need all of these things, much like the moving parts of an automobile. You actually need this. Following the legalization argument, we have problems with burglary and rape. Why not legalize that? Same argument.
Oh, come on.
Why not legalize that?
That's an extreme.
That's a ludicrous argument.
That's an extreme.
Then you take a proponent of legalization, as Mr. Rangel said, from Princeton, telling the people in the inner city what's good for them. It has no credibility.
Well, Mr. Nadelman is not telling me anything. I'd like a little respect in terms of my ability to arrive at certain decisions on my own. I think it's very important that people don't want to admit that they have been making a mistake for 70 years. Prohibition has been here for 70 years, and we have the worst drug epidemic ever.
Congressman Rangel says your idea of legalization is dumb. Why do you believe it is not dumb, in simple terms?
Why? Because simple common sense, as well as a careful study of the evidence, shows that most of what people identify as part and parcel of the drug problem are in fact the results of drug prohibition. That's why.
But even if that is true, if you cease prohibition and make marijuana and heroin and cocaine and crack available, generally available to the adult population, because most of these proposals would limit it to minors, aren't you just going to make the problem, as you heard Secretary Bennett say in that thing, much worse? There will be more drug-induced accidents, people flying planes and running trains and...
They're doing it now.
I make an assumption that the vast majority of Americans don't need drug laws to keep from becoming drug addicts.
Don't.
Secondly, that the millions of people in the inner cities who are drug abusers and drug addicts, there's nothing that criminal laws can keep that from happening. The only thing that may work are beneficial programs like Head Start and pre- and postnatal care. All the economic incentives we create through prohibition induce more of those people into drug dealing and drug abuse.
What is your answer to that? That none of the criminal justice system can prevent people in the inner city or out of the inner city from using drugs?
Laws cannot legislate human behavior. I don't disagree
so you agree
with
with
that.
him on that.
But if that's using that same argument, let's legalize rape. Let's legalize murder.
Ron, it's
let's
ludicrous.
legalize
There's a simple
burglary.
difference.
That's the same argument.
Simple difference.
That's
You know
the same
something?
argument.
With rape, murder, robbery, extortion, people cannot walk away from those crimes. With drugs, prostitution, what have you, you know something? You can walk away. Most people do say no.
You can't
That's
walk
the
away
big
from a drug
difference.
crime.
Oh,
You know,
come on.
when you talk about
Come
the
on.
jail
You know
system,
something?
there's
Drugs are not genies. They don't jump at you. They don't seize you. They're not like Ulysses and the Sirens, where somehow you just be totally bought into the thing. Most people in this world say no to drugs, say no to drug abuse. That's going to be true whether we have drug laws or not.
some of us
Randall.
are not prepared to write off the kids in the inner cities. And I would agree with you, Professor, that this criminal justice system is not working. It would seem to me that we could open up some of our military camps, that we could have halfway houses, that we could educate these inmates, that we could prepare them to assimilate into society, and that we could do this without saying that we're giving up and we're giving them drugs. Some of the questions I've raised, you and Judge Sweet and others have never really answered, and that is this, that, one, I assume you're talking about giving a legal dosage. Have you ever seen an alcoholic say that he's had enough? Aren't they going to go after the so-called legal dosage into the illegal market?
Let's ask him that. That's
Yes.
all.
Aren't they going to do that?
Let's ask him that.
AA and other alcohol treatment units have millions of people who actually did hit a point where they just said no, where they said enough is enough.
I'm saying
wanna
if
know
you
something?
get your prescription drug,
Charlie, yeah, you know, when you ask a question, you should
are
at
you going to
least
have a
wait.
limit?
Let
And what
him-
when
let
you
him
going
answer,
back
and then-
to
When
liquor?
When you ask, you brought up liquor. And you brought up alcoholics. When you ask a question, wait for the answer.
What about
I'm
crack,
saying,
Professor?
You know something?
I mean, you're lecturing, Professor.
Most people in this world don't want to take crack. And those people who are taking crack right now, there's nothing that your drug prohibition can do to stop that. And what's more, there are people who take crack who have stopped. And they've stopped not just because they've been thrown in jail. Because as you know, jail doesn't make them drug free.
The question, Professor,
Charlie, stop interrupting,
is,
okay?
the professor
you ask a
is
question,
that
and
once
I'm
you
gonna
get
give you
your
an answer.
legal dosage, do they go into the illicit market for what they want to
Okay.
get high? That's the question.
Well, all right. There's.
If not, why not?
Yeah, there's a question. If you let people have the substance legally, how are you going to stop a black market from forming so that they will be able to pay to get it outside hours or more than the amount that's legally available?
Alcohol and tobacco are legal, and we still have black markets in alcohol and tobacco for kids because
you
the
still
mafia
have-
gets
Let
into
him-
it.
let him
Yeah, but
answer,
you want to know
Congressman.
something? A lot better world, in one in which 90 to 95% of the market is legal, regulated, tax controlled, than one like the current system, the one that you both support, which is one where the criminals control it, where they determine price, purity, what have you. We now have 95 to 100% black market. I'm not saying legalization eliminates the black market. I am saying that we should bring the problem above ground, and that if we go to a world in which 70% of the market is legitimate, legal, controlled, we live in a much better world, one with fewer drug overdoses, one with much poorer criminals, one where cops and police can go after the types of criminals that people cannot walk away
Now
from.
that you admit it doesn't eliminate the illegal market, the other question I have, and you always have difficulty.
80%'s not bad. 80%
Well, it was 70
not bad.
just a couple of seconds ago. It was 70%.
Charlie, you're probably no better predicting the future than I am.
Professor, the question I have is that, assuming that you're not going to discriminate against the poor who are drug addicts and that it has to be dispensed to them, I ask, under what program would you suggest that we provide it to them? Would it be an expansion of Medicaid? Would we have drug stamps? Or would we just say that we're lowering the price and then they have to go to their public hospitals to receive it?
What we do with oral methadone today, we can do with other drugs as well.
God,
In England, you
yes.
have not just oral methadone, you have injectable methadone, injectable heroin maintenance, even injectable cocaine maintenance. My first priority is this. I want to make it less likely that addicts go out and hurt other people. And if that means giving them the drugs that they want to use and even kill themselves, so be it.
Oh my God.
Secondly, I'm saying that our second priority with addicts, the addicts are getting the drugs anyway, and as it is right now, they're stealing and mugging and hurting other people to raise the money. I'm saying take away their need to raise the money, give it to them. And secondly, give them the resources in a positive sense, to make it less likely that they need to go out and do those things.
I like
That's my priority.
Let's have Mr. Johnson here.
What I hear with that argument is that not we care so much for the addicts, we want to do something for the addicts. What I hear is that let's give them drugs so they won't harm us.
If that's what you hear, then you're not listening.
I'm listening.
What I'm saying is our first priority as a society is to make it less likely that addicts hurt other people. My first concern is innocent people. I don't want innocent people being hurt by drug addicts. My second priority is help the drug addicts, and that means positive things, not prison cells. Not go to jail first before we give you a treatment program.
Let me tell you how positive you can be, Professor. Right now, we're fighting.
Mayor Perry.
Right now,
there's no one in this country.
Just let Mayor Perry talk.
This is disadvantage of not being in New York with the guys. But anyway, there's no one in this country that believes we're winning the war on drugs. In our cities, everyone feels like a hostage. If you ask anyone what is their priority, they say public safety and education of our young people, and also for them to grow up and to live. And the policy that is working now, there is no indication that there is a will and a spirit on the national level to really put an all-out effort.
Okay, Ms. Mayor, I have to interrupt you there because we've just come to the end of our time. I'd just like to ask each of you as we go around. The mayor says it isn't working. She thinks it can't work. You think it can't work, the present policy. Do you really think the present policy can work? The policy you're wedded to can work?
Yes, I think it can. If we have this commitment and not just rhetoric that we've been having for 10, 20 years.
Still just rhetoric? Is it still just rhetoric?
We had rhetoric 10 to 20 years, but if you put some resources into treatment, prevention, education, also enforcement, then I think that we can do it.
Do you really think the policy can work?
If we really declared war and all we've had is a war of words, we really haven't put the resources there. It's interesting that the professor would talk about using the Medicaid program to dispense the poison when we have not been successful enough to use the Medicaid program to provide treatment for addicts. And so it seems to me that if we fight on the areas that Sterling Johnson was talking about, we can win. On the other hand, we can surrender the whole darn thing to the drug pushers to supplement the program.
I have a feeling we'll be back to this argument. Congressman, Mr. Johnson, Professor Nadelman, and Mayor Perry, thank you all for joining us.
All right, good night.